The following is a presentation of the Women's Football Alliance. For the first time this season, all 14 WFA Pro teams play this weekend. Every win and every loss can help your team make or miss the playoffs on the road to Canton. Welcome to the Road to Canton. I'm your host, Brian Sweeney, the voice of the Women's Football Alliance Pro Division National Championship game. Each of the 14 teams in the Pro Division have now played at least 3, if not 4, of their 6 games this season. And every week, that win or that loss can help your team make or break the playoffs. Let's look back at Week 4's scores and highlights. The Alabama Fire keep their perfect record strong with an impressive win over the Derby City Dynamite, final score 52-0. The win moves Alabama into the 3rd playoff spot in the National Conference. The DC Divas picked up their first win of the season with a 21-14 win over the Tampa Bay Inferno. This victory keeps DC in the playoff hunt this season and has Tampa on the outside currently looking in. The Dallas Elite Mustangs pick up their 2nd win of the season with a 22-8 victory over the Mile High Blaze. In the highly competitive American Conference, the loss for the Blaze has them on the outside of the playoff bubble. In this week's game on the For the Fans Network, Pittsburgh and Boston squared off in a game that could have decided who was the #1 seed in the National Conference. As always, Boston showed their dominance and came out with the victory. Alex, this game started strong and ended strong for the Renegades.
Well, I think, Brian, last week when we had this conversation about Boston and Pittsburgh in terms of where these teams were going to go, realistically, we knew that the defense of Pittsburgh had to be strong with the injuries they had on the offensive side of the ball. Realistically, this was not a close game. 61-0 in favor of the Boston Renegades. You would have Pittsburgh go on an offensive possession, and then it would turn into 0 points, maybe a 3 and out, maybe an extra play beyond that 3 and out before the turnover would happen as a result of that, and then Boston would take the football, and they would drive it down the field, and it would turn into 6 or 7 points. Boston's offense was scoring at will. This is the 61 points that they put up against the Pittsburgh Passion, their 2nd most all-time, too shy of their all-time record, 63, that they've scored against Pittsburgh in the past. It's the first time that Pittsburgh has been shut out in the 9 all-the-time meetings with the Boston Renegades. And so realistically, this was a matchup that on paper should have been a lot closer than what it was. But unfortunately, due to the injuries, due to the strength of the Boston Renegades, this matchup was over as soon as it started. But you take a look at where Pittsburgh is at. Right now, the injuries, clearly they're apparent. When you're shut out for the first time in forever and the first time against the Boston Renegades, you know that something's not right with your offense. And certainly we saw that with Pittsburgh. Problem is, or I guess the good thing is for Pittsburgh, is that if you look at where they are in the Massey ratings, based on their strength of schedule, based on the results that they have so far, realistically, this Pittsburgh Passion team should still be that #2 in the National Conference. Are they prone to upset? Certainly in the playoffs. At this point, yeah, absolutely. I think Alabama behind them is interesting. I think DC now, with more of a full season to get their offense in rhythm, is a threat to upset them at home if it is at home. And you wonder where Pittsburgh is going to turn. Alyssa George certainly was attempting to do the best she could with what she had, but ultimately it wasn't enough. And when you see this matchup coming back to fruition again in the end of the season in Week 8 in Pittsburgh, you sit there and you wonder, where's the health of the Pittsburgh Passion going to be? Is Boston going to call off the dogs a little bit? At this point, probably having wrapped up the #1 seed in the WFA on the American and the national side. You wonder where Pittsburgh's going to be in that Week 8 matchup. But Boston, again, they prove why they're the best and why they haven't lost in 5 years. They know how to score the ball. They know how to stop the ball from going into the end zone. And again, the favorite for a 5-peat in the WFA Pro.
It's Monday morning and you're still feeling the hits from your Saturday's game. Lois Cook is here to explain why in her segment, Low on the Go.
Researchers and medical professionals of the Woofa University Medical Center have been conducting studies of a not-so-new phenomenon that has hit the entire country. Players and athletes are waking up after competition with very unique symptoms, such as not being able to move out of the bed, with aches and pains throughout the body, such as the back and the neck and the neck and the back. Players have been questioning, is this carpal tunnel, or was that simply just a very great block in the game? Our researchers have been collecting extensive data and observations, and they have reported that these symptoms can be found throughout the body from the rooter to the tutor. These symptoms are onset anywhere between 1 and 48 hours after competition and can vary depending on the age of the player. Players are sore to the touch. They are walking with smaller gaits and shorter strides as they endure these complications. Players have reported that they are feeling as though they have been hit by a bus. Even though they have not been hit by a bus, they are contacting friends and family to come to their aid with little to no relief. We have taken a deep dive and interviewed the muscles of the body, and they have told us that they are overworked, overtired, and simply underpaid. As chiropractor visits have been on the rise, masseuse visits are on demand, and players are allowing society to walk on by on these Sundays and Mondays as they stand there behind a pole with a smile on their face to mask the symptoms. Pet owners are reporting that their pets are increasingly frustrated as their parents are stuck in the bed. They are stuck there with them, and their platters are pushing it to the limits. Interestingly, players have been met with an emotional side effect when these symptoms are onset after a loss in the game. Players have been found deeply saddened while they are hurting, not just physically, but also emotionally. Players have taken their own series of tests. However, those have been found to be not relevant. As our doctors and our researchers have been spending countless hours trying to determine what exactly is this phenomenon, they have found that no, indeed, it is not being hit by a bus, but this has come from the WFA, and it's known as Mack Truck Monday. And our own Lo is on the ground right now. I think she has someone to talk to. Let's see what she has. Hey, excuse me. Hi, how are you? Okay, just one second. Whew. It's a long way. Hey, hi. So, I lost my air. That's okay. Hey there. Hi, how are you? So you have been the blame behind the Mack Truck Monday phenomena. How does that make you feel? What do you have to say for yourself? There you have it. Thank you for your time. And there you have it. Thank you for joining us.
We'll be right back. The Women's Football Alliance wants to thank their sponsors. Thank you for your support of the Women's Football Alliance. Welcome back. In the Women's Sports Network Game of the Week, the Houston Energy traveled to play the Minnesota Vixen for the first time in 16 years. From a packed stadium to a back-and-forth action on the field, this game did not disappoint. Alex, in the end, Minnesota leapfrogged Houston for the #3 seed in the American Conference.
Well, and more so in the Massey ratings, they also had to leapfrog them in the game itself. Houston leading at the end of the first quarter 8-7 before touchdowns were able to really pull Minnesota away from Houston. There's a couple of things that I look at with this game overall, Brian. For Minnesota, their first head-to-head win since the year 2000. It's been a long time coming for the Minnesota Vixen to beat the Houston Energy once again, and they really had a great recipe for success in that contest last Saturday in week #4. Their first points against Houston since the year 2000 as well. There's a lot of really good statistics here where Minnesota knew the record against Houston, and they were able to take advantage of that. They had some really great things working well, combining simple runs on first, second, and third down to really establish that pass game. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But here, really great stuff on the Minnesota offense and the defensive side of the ball. For me, the star of the show was Minnesota's depth. 4 touchdowns for the Minnesota Vixen in week number 4, all from 4 different receivers. Nikki Hyber with her first, Jackie Radford with another. You take a look at Amanda Dvorak, who's finally working her way back from injury from last season, and now one of the top 10 receivers in the WFA Pro Division in terms of yards total on the season, having a really nice series of play. And then, of course, Train Griffin, Angela Griffin, with that great running touchdown that ultimately put it away for Minnesota late in the 4th quarter. The question I had last week was, how was Erin Kelly going to do against the Houston Energy defense? And Brian, the stats speak for themselves. Erin Kelly in week 4 against Houston, 10 for 15, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. We knew going into that contest that Minnesota's success would rely on Erin Kelly's throwing the football. We talked about week 1, her struggles. Week 3 against Nebraska did reasonably well. And then here against the WFA Pro opponent in week number 4, a really solid job navigating this Minnesota offense. Houston as well, their offense was rolling in the first half. We saw it as it was going on. Brooke Wilson and Houston was finding success to the outside, using the runs to the outside and using the passes deep as well in order to try to connect downfield with the options that Houston had in their secondary and what they saw on the Minnesota side of the football. But then you look at things in the second half. You go for Brooke Wilson from a touchdown, 14 carries, 51 yards, and a touchdown. Christina Jakes needed to throw the football better. Simply put, 11 for 23, 145, a touchdown, and an interception. You look at Houston in the second half. 2 drives for the Houston Energy, 1 of 16 plays, 1 of 14 plays that turned into 0 points on the scoreboard and 1 turnover, an interception by Megan Dixon in the end zone. Simply put, if you're a football team, and the Houston Energy, by all definitions, are indeed a football team, you have to finish off those drives with points, whether it be field goals or touchdowns, when you have scoring opportunities on lengthy drives. Houston, simply put, didn't do it, and it might be a reason why they're either watching from home or going on the road in the opening round of the WFA playoffs, June 24th, 25th. Houston's strength of schedule is something that worries me as well for the Houston Energy the rest of the way. This week, they're at Zydeco Spice. Then they play Arlington and Austin. All opponents, realistically, per Massey ratings, they should have no problem with whatsoever. The question becomes is, how much does Houston need to run up the score? We've seen Christina Jakes play well in games this season against lower-level opposition. We've seen the running game work so well as Brooke Wilson has really emerged as a runner for the Houston Energy. The question now becomes is how much, again, you need to win those games by 30, 40, 50 points realistically to give yourself a good strength in the playoff picture, and then you need some help too. Otherwise, the Energy will be packing it up and taking it on the road, presumably to Cali, to St. Louis, or even maybe to Minnesota to start their playoff run.
With half of the season over, each remaining game can help your team to make or miss the playoffs. Here's a look at the Week 5 Pro Division matchups. The 1-2 Arlington Impact come off of a bye and will travel to play the 2-1 Austin Outlaws of Division 2. The 2-2 Dallas Elite Mustangs host the 3-0 OKC Lady Force of Division 2. The 2-1 Houston Energy are on the road again this week when they travel to play the 0-3 Zydeco Spice of Division 3. The 2-1 Mile High Blaze play at home and welcome the 3-1 New Mexico Banditas of Division 3. And WFA Pro versus Pro games. The 1-2 DC Divas welcome the 3-0 Boston Renegades. Boston sits firmly on top of the National Conference, and DC is the number 4 spot and looking for a chance to move up. The 0-3 Detroit Venom, coming off of a bye week, look to get into the win column when they welcome the 2-1 Pittsburgh Passion. The 3-0 Cali War host the 1-2 Nevada Storm. This week on the For the Fans Network game, 2 National Conference teams face off for a chance to move up in the ratings when the 1-2 Tampa Bay Inferno welcome the 3-0 Alabama Fire. Alex, the outcome of this game can decide who plays in a month and whose season is over.
Well, I think we can take it from one step to it could determine to I think that it will determine based on where the National Conference sits right now. Let's start with the Alabama Fire, their first year at the WFA Pro level, and this is their first game at the WFA Pro level too. Looking at where Alabama's at, they're 3-0 right now. They've beaten Derby City twice. They've beaten Atlanta once. They've given up 26 points in 3 games this season. Face value, that looks great, but again, consider the opposition, consider the opponents that they've had. 20 of those 26 points came to Atlanta, and and you're looking for teams at Division II now that may move up to WFA Pro, I figure the Atlanta Pride, if they can continue to work their way through that, will be able to be a team that'll be WFA Pro, if not next season, but a season within 2 or 3 beyond here at this point. WFA Pro teams oftentimes have very balanced attacks, running the ball and passing the ball. Alabama is not a balanced attack at all. Taking a look at the Alabama Fire, they lead the WFA Pro in rushing yards per game at 280. The next closest team, 75 yards behind them, 205. That mark belongs to the Boston Renegades. Passing has been a challenge for the Alabama Fire. I'm not sure if it's part of their strategy. I'm not sure if it's part of their playbook. I'm not sure if it's part of their capability. But they don't pass the ball often. There's just one team at the WFA Pro level, the Detroit Venom, that throw for fewer yards per game than the Alabama Fire does, as Alabama's yards per game through the air is a minuscule 77. Let's take that down one step to Division II. There's only 3 teams at Division II that throw for fewer yards than the Alabama Fire. So if I'm Tampa Bay, I look at that and I say, well, they're going to be running the football a lot. We can send 8 to the house. We can pack the offensive defensive line, try to win in the trenches to force Alabama to throw the football because they're unproven in that category. And realistically, if you're Tampa Bay, you have that advantage going in where you know exactly what Alabama is going to be giving you in Week 5 on Saturday. 3 penalties all season for the Alabama Fire. This is a very well-coached team. This is a very well-disciplined team, something that certainly should play a factor in this matchup. We've seen it before, countless times at the WFA level, Brian, where you have opponents and you have teams that commit penalties too frequently. It kills drives, it kills opportunities, and ultimately, in some cases, it's the difference between winning and losing. For Alabama, it's not a concern at all. 3 penalties all season at this point in the year, that's phenomenal. And certainly for Alabama, they have to be happy with that through 3 games. Take a look at what they have on offense. Their quarterback, Sanisha Smith, and their running back, Kelly Smith. Kelly Smith, the WFA Pro leading rusher with 412 yards on the ground this season, 100 yards more than anybody else in the division. You take a look at what they do, we know what Alabama's about. They run the football, they play defense. The question becomes for Alabama, will their defense be able to withstand a WFA Pro opponent, or can they prove that the 20 points that they gave up to Atlanta is not an indicator of where they might be against the pro level? Elsewhere, you look at Tampa. We've seen Tampa Bay this year. They are a quality defensive team, but still trying to figure things out on offense. 21 points per game is the most that they've given up this season. They've done it to Pittsburgh, and they did it to DC as well. That loss to the DC Divas last week really puts their season in jeopardy, because to me, I saw that as a matchup that Tampa Bay had to win and should have won. But again, you let in my opinion, a weaker opponent to what Tampa Bay has hang around, they'll find ways to beat you. And sure enough, that's what the DC Divas did, and it helps out DC. Candace Pistol, we've talked about her when Pittsburgh played Tampa on the game of the week, where Candace Pistol needs to pass better. She needs to be able to find the receivers and take the open route. Right now on the season, Candace 16 for 42 all season. Tampa has no receivers that are over 100 yards receiving, when in WFA Pro there's 16 receivers that have more than 100 yards at this point of the season. She has to be better. We saw that in that Pittsburgh game, where she had the opportunities that were given to her by the Pittsburgh defense, but she couldn't do anything with it. She made the first play, she let the running back carry it up for the second play, but then when it came time for that third down, that really big play in that game against Pittsburgh, they just ran out of options, and they ran out of the ability to execute on that final level. The Massey ratings for this contest suggest that Alabama wins 26-20, winning 60% of the time. It'll be a matchup of, can Alabama's running game create options for their passing game, and what will Tampa Bay's defense do in response? Can they set up short fields to give Candace Pistol more options? Because we know she can pass, we know she can run, but we also know that she can kick. And ultimately, a field goal here or there, we've seen it before at the WFA level, a field goal here or there certainly has huge implications in who wins a game and who loses, and Tampa Bay might have that edge in that factor, and we'll find out at the end of this week where the Alabama Fire really are.
And we'll be right back.
The Women's Football Alliance wants to thank their sponsors. Thank you for your support of the Women's Football Alliance.
Welcome back. In the second game of the week, shown again on the Women's Sports Network, we have the Minnesota Vixen hosting the St. Louis Slam. Whereas Minnesota has never won in the city of St. Louis. St. Louis has not won in Minnesota since 2017. Alex, this game may very well decide who starts or gets a home playoff game and who starts or has to play on the road.
Well, and Brian, you mentioned that the last time that St. Louis won in Minnesota was 2017. It's also the last time that Minnesota's lost at home. That game in 2017 to the St. Louis Slam. Minnesota's been dominant at home in the last 5 years in the WFA. And certainly St. Louis at this point figures to be the toughest test. They've gotten some scares from Cali in the playoffs. They had a scare from Nevada in the opening quarter of their playoff game last year. This is a Minnesota team that's living on the fringe, certainly, of tiptoeing around that potential home upset. And this one here certainly doesn't appear to be an upset. Massey actually has St. Louis favored in this contest. But let's look at this one. It's the Avenue of the Saints rivalry, Highway 61, where every time going up and down Highway 61 for Minnesota or St. Louis, someone always goes the opposite way and they go home angry. This is as bitter of a rivalry as you will find not just in the American Conference, but you could argue across professional football. The Minnesota players, they don't like St. Louis. St. Louis definitely doesn't like Minnesota. This is a fierce rivalry, and you'll see it in the game of the week coming up on Saturday. It's weird, and it's a unique opportunity. This is the second time that these two teams have played already this season. It was a 20-0 win for St. Louis at St. Mary's High School in St. Louis, where Minnesota was given opportunities, did not execute on those opportunities, and St. Louis, simply put, with the opportunities they had, they were able to take advantage of them. That was the difference in week one. We mentioned in the past Aaron Kelly's worst game as a member of the Minnesota Vixen came against the St. Louis Slam in week one. We talked about earlier in the show here where she looked better in week two. She looked better in week 4 against Houston. She'll need to be good again here in week number 5 against St. Louis. Let's take a look at the Slam. Again, the last team to beat Minnesota at home, May 27th, 2017. They also shut out Minnesota in that first game for the Vixens' first shutout that they had. No points on the scoreboard since 2017 as well, a 55-0 loss to Dallas in the conference championship game. St. Louis is a little bit of an aging team in that the core of the St. Louis Slam, specifically quarterback Jamie Gall and running back Taylor Hay, have been around for a long time. The problem is Jamie Gall has not gotten any worse, and she's aged like a fine wine. Taking a look at Jamie Gall this season, she's the WFA's leading passer, 647 yards through the air. Allison Cahill is not close to her, and certainly no other quarterback, Aaron Kelly included, is close to her in terms of passing yards. She's been phenomenal the older that she's gotten and the more experience that she has. You talk about St. Louis as a team a year ago that hadn't played in 2 full seasons, that hadn't developed their system of offense. It looked like in that first game last year in Minneapolis and St. Paul, it looked like St. Louis was rusty. But then by the time that the lights went out in St. Louis in week 7 last year, it was something where you could start to see that St. Louis was coming back to life. It was a team that led the Boston Renegades at the end of the first half in their contest hosting Boston. Incredible and unheard of, certainly, for a team to be able to be leading Boston at the half, home or away. And so St. Louis appeared to be making those strides back to relevance. We can see that now this season. So far, 3 games, 3 really good victories. The quality of the opposition, again, maybe not what you want if you're St. Louis, but with those regional matchups and the rules of travel in the WFA, it's tough certainly for St. Louis to find them. You could go down to a Dallas, you could go down to an Arlington, to a Houston, go across, maybe Columbus moves up, Oklahoma City moves up. They're having a great season at Division II, but right now their strength of schedule could be something that limits them if they drop this game to Minnesota. We talked about that core. Taylor Hay, effective but limited, 150 yards on the ground this year. Definitely not what she's used to having at the WFA pro level. She's been one of the stalwarts for this team her entire career in St. Louis, and certainly figures to be a figurehead of that offense, and certainly headed for another All-American honor for the St. Louis Slam this year. Receiving-wise, Jada Humphrey and Kara McMahon, 400 receiving yards combined between the two. They've been phenomenal elevations from this team. Danielle Price, a season ago, doesn't have the effectiveness that she did if she's on the team at all. And certainly Kaylee Knightsling, more playing the defensive side of the ball now for St. Louis, hasn't factored as much into the offensive passing game as I expected her to this season, but St. Louis has found a way, largely again, due to the quarterback Jamie Gall. Take a look on the defensive side. Jasmine Yandel, third most tackles in the WFA Pro Division. She's going to be all over the ball again, especially with what we know Minnesota does. We know that they do runs up the middle. We know that they do quick hitters out to the outside. Yandel can cover the entire defensive midfield area, and she can force pressure on the quarterback, Erin Kelly, to do some really good things on the defensive side for St. Louis. Minnesota, on the other hand, they have some really strong portions as well. Chelsea Swanson, talk about number 70 for the Minnesota Vixen on the defensive line. Tied for the league lead in sacks this season with 4. They've been a great threat on the defensive side of the ball and have really terrorized quarterbacks through 3 games for Minnesota this season. Minnesota offensively, compared to St. Louis in terms of yards per game on average, Minnesota's better than St. Louis by about 8 yards per game. You talk about Sarah Roche, who's really stepped into her own as that feature back for Minnesota. Shayna Sparrow at the tight end position. Then the plethora of passing options for the quarterback, Erin Kelly. If you look back to that tape in week 1 against Minnesota and St. Louis, you really see Erin Kelly leading her receivers too far, overthrowing, underthrowing, not being on the same page. We saw in week 2 that the communication was there. We really saw it in week 4. She will need to be on her game to beat St. Louis. Minnesota needs this game. Minnesota has the ability to control their fate throughout the remainder of the playoffs because the 2 teams ahead of them, St. Louis and Cali, they both get the chance to beat themselves. They have an extra game against Nebraska, which at the end of the day needs to be a blowout win for Minnesota. The Massey ratings for this game suggest a 26-20 St. Louis win with a 58% chance of winning for the St. Louis Slam. I expect that to be the case, but if you look for a Minnesota upset, you're looking for defensive pressure on the front line. You talk about Red Bryant, who's been playing football since 1999, and even as old as she gets and as much tenure and experience she shows, she is still a lethal threat on the defensive line for Minnesota. She has every capability to get to the quarterback, to sack the quarterback, and to make the quarterback wish they hadn't played football. That's what Red Bryant does, and that's certainly something that Jamie Gall, having experience against Minnesota, is certainly having in the back of her head as they make the drive up Highway 61 for this contest. I like St. Louis again because of the options on the offensive side of the football. Minnesota can upset St. Louis if they do 2 things. 1, turnovers. They have to be cleaner on the turnovers. Historically against St. Louis, they give the ball away when they need to keep possession. That's something that I'm looking forward to in this game in week 5. Secondly, they need a turnover on the defensive side. We saw it from Megan Dixon. We saw it from Hannah Eckhart. We saw it from Amy Mugas. This is a team that realistically needs to take advantage of those turnovers, and when they get them, they have to score points. They need to learn from their mistakes in week 1 to be able to execute in week 5 and hopefully secure for Minnesota home field advantage.
Remember to keep those emails coming to roadtocantonshow@gmail.com. For Lois Cook and Alex Westhead, I'm Brian Sweeney, and we'll see you next week on the Road to Canton.
Thank you for watching the preceding presentation from the Women's Football Alliance.